Thank you so much for all the support you gave me, guys.
Okay.
Today, I got promoted.
Those who spread goodness radiate happiness to everyone around them. Introducing LOLC Finance Credit Cards. Fuel the goodness in you.
Welcome to LMDtv. This week on Talking Business, Anushan Selvarajah speaks with the CEO of Nations Trust Bank, Priyantha Talwatte.
Welcome to the show, Priyantha. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be with you guys all the time.
Just in a nutshell, what is the state of play in the banking sector at this point of time?
As we all know, the whole world is impacted with the present pandemic, and even in Sri Lanka, almost all industry and the banking sector is also impacted due to the pandemic. How we look at it is we look at it in 3 time zones. We look at an era of pre-pandemic, pandemic, and a post-pandemic era. So during the pandemic, as you would know, the impacts by different sectors have been very different, and they're not all equally impacted. Some have been unevenly impacted. So some have recovered much faster, while the others will take a longer while to recover. Looking at from a very consumer point of view, or the individuals, so to speak, the markets are very, very subdued. I want to paraphrase a nice saying that, prior to the pandemic, people used to look at the world is your oyster kind of a thinking process. But as the pandemic came in, people started saying the oyster is the world, or your home is the oyster, right? Because lots of things got restricted. And along with that, I think unlike any time in our recent histories, in our working lives, we have seen there was so much of restrictions in travel and physical activity, right, where there was social interaction, and so that all business models that were run through interaction and physicality has been impacted. So these are some impacts that the banking industry has to face as we go along.
So then what would you say are the prospects for the sector in 2021?
Yes. So I think the smoothening effects of what the government interventions have been very welcome. And for 2021, I think the much awaited prospects of the vaccine and the therapeutics and the kind of herd immunity that we are seeing, we think by about the second quarter, we would see the environment opening up a little bit more and a little bit better. We will have the first quarter very much like what it is in the fourth quarter of last year. And we see the second half of the year, we will see economic activity picking up.
What would be the challenges then?
Well, I mean, so as I told you before, it impacts unevenly different industries. Some industries are up and running, and even some of them are running better than before. The other impacted industry needs handholding, needs careful working through with them. So early identification of these plan selection is important within the banking sector, and working very closely with them is important. Of course, there will be some fall-offs. There will be some in-between fall-offs as well. So these are, to speak in a more relevant language, these are different waves that we also have to go along with and be prepared and be project to what would happen and be ready for it.
The governor of the central bank has pledged to keep interest rates at single-digit levels this year. What are the implications of this for the banking sector?
I think it's a good thing. It will support the existing borrowers to also service their facilities, one, and also it will encourage new investments. Of course, you have an impact on the other side of the depositors, people who are dependent totally on interest income, people who are senior citizens, who are retirees. I mean, they will be having challenges in seeing there aren't any other alternative investment categories to get returns back.
Now, the digitization process of the banking sector itself is going on at a pace. Now, what have been the challenges in implementing this here in Sri Lanka?
Well, I think digitization has been happening in Sri Lanka, and today the whole world is looking at digitization. Whether even if you are an industrial company or you are a manufacturing company, everybody seems to be looking at digitization because the physical models have been threatened and there has been questions asked. So in the banking sector, I think again it's unevenly felt. There were early starters who had started and gone through on that journey for way into the journey, whereas some had already started and some have not started at all. So I think people will not be now thinking of whether it is a digital model. I think with the pandemic, people have embraced it, and it has become the only way of doing transactions and only way of interacting. So it has come to stay. I think it will have a permanent impact on the post-pandemic environment. And the digital implementations, if they have not been done on time prior to the crisis, I think a lot of them will be rushing into implementing some of those digital initiatives that enables a digital delivery service model.
We'll go in for a short break now.
Our story is one of reimagining. Reimagining who you can be, what you can achieve, and how SEMA can support you. As technology and digital platforms disrupt businesses, we are reimagining what the profession can be. We've updated our syllabus to meet the expectation of employers, ensuring SEMA qualified professionals have the skills to make an impact from day one. Reimagine your career. Contact SEMA Sri Lanka.
Welcome back to the show as we continue our discussion with the CEO of Nations Trust Bank, Priyantha Talwatte. Now, before the break, you said that digitization is here to stay, but that brings into question the aspect of data security. Does the banking sector have the ability to protect what is arguably now one of the most valuable resources, personal information?
Yes, I think it's a very, very good question. I think my answer to that is, I mean, there is never an end state. It's a journey always. The security is an ongoing journey. You got to be at it, and as things evolve, you got to up the game. So you can't be doing digital without looking at security. So it comes hand in hand, and I think there's a lot of effort that is going on by the regulator as well as so many other supporting institutions towards ensuring that the security and safety and the privacy of data and information is protected and used in this digital era.
How do you view the steps being taken to review the Banking Act?
Especially the requirement for banks to implement collection plans.
So I think, so this is my personal view. I think there's been a lot of work that has been done over the years, maybe since independence, looking at protecting the borrowers, right? But there is not enough, in my mind, there is not enough work that is being done in protecting the lenders, right? So if you really have sufficient protection of lenders, then there is a phenomenon called, democratization of credit. Today in our country, though we all like to think that there is access to credit, it's not available for everybody, right? We see so much of lending that happens outside the formal banking sector in very informal scenarios. I think there was a news article recently. There are more than 1,000 odd unregistered leasing companies in the country. So, I think there's a lot more to be done in terms of protecting the lenders, right, while protecting the borrowers. It's a bit of a contradiction, and it's a new thought. While a lot of people have been always thinking that no, it is the borrower who you need to protect. But I think by doing that, we have also not done justice to the borrower themselves, because some of them are being driven away from the formal lending sectors.
Now the central bank printed 650 billion rupees last year to mitigate the impact of the pandemic. Now this may continue this year as well. Priyantha, is this a necessary evil?
I think every policy choice has benefits, and it also has limits. So I think the printing of money on the short term is a good option, right? Because you are looking at again, we go back to the oyster. I mean, if your home is an oyster, then you are very much constrained within your own geography, and within that environment, you could print money to ensure that liquidity, because of the restrictions of mobility. There is different places the cash is being hoarded, and the volatility, the velocity of cash has been restricted. So pumping in liquidity, I believe in the short term is a good thing. But if you don't control it, I mean, we have cases like what happened in Zimbabwe, which can get out of hand pretty fast. So it has its limits. So I believe, I mean, you can't continue it as an ongoing strategy, but it's a good stopgap measure.
How has the competition been within the sector?
Well, I think it has been very intensive going into the pre-pandemic era. But I think during the pandemic, everybody was looking at more inward looking, and looking at your liquidity, looking at your non-performing, your rehabilitation of your existing customers, looking at costs, looking at efficiencies. So competition in 2020, I would think, was fairly subdued, because everybody was looking inward. But for us, from a medium-sized bank, I think we've done a lot on moving ahead of the curve in some of those areas. So we think our franchise and our franchise value will hold us well going out of the pandemic.
As a final question then, Priyantha, what is your outlook for the banking sector this year?
Well, we are cautiously optimistic, right? We think, as I explained a little while ago, we think the economy will pick up in the second half. Few caveats. I think we would not have a third wave or a new mutation of the virus, and there won't be any natural disasters, maybe no floods, no droughts, no heavy rain kind of a thing. If the crops and the seasons are within control, we think that by second half of the year, the economy will start picking up, and we will come out of the sluggish economy that we are in the backdrop of coming out from 2020, where we have a negative growth. I think there's a lot of headroom to accelerate and move forward.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you very much for joining us on the show, Priyantha. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you very much, and all the very best to you.
After a short break, Ashwini Vethakan will bring you a roundup of local news. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Ashwini Vethakan, and here's a roundup of local news. As of this week, the number of COVID-19 infected patients in Sri Lanka stands at 59,922, with the number of recoveries reaching 51,046. And the total number of deaths now stands at 288. The head of the National Operations Center for Prevention of COVID-19 outbreak announced that the isolation of several areas would be lifted, while also isolating a few new areas. Health authorities have said steps will be taken to commence a vaccination drive in the country after importing the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine from India this week. The vaccine would first be offered to frontline workers battling the pandemic, including healthcare workers, and the Health Ministry said steps should be taken to swiftly distribute the vaccine among the country's population. The Civil Aviation Authority has approved over 20 charter flights to bring in tourists in February and March. The new approvals are for flights operated by Ukraine International and SkyUp from Ukraine and Air Astana from Kazakhstan. The CAA last week announced that it had approved 2 new airlines to operate into Sri Lanka, increasing the number of registered carriers to nearly 40. Meanwhile, religious leaders, trade unions, and civil and political organizations are continuing their demands against the sale of the East Container Terminal of the Colombo port. They point out that this terminal, which is 8 meters deep, can be used to dock some of the largest ships in the world. 85% of the Colombo South Terminal is owned by a Chinese-owned company, while the majority stake of the South Asia Gateway Terminal, located adjacent to the ECT, is owned by private companies. Trade unions allege that as the Jaya Terminal, currently operated by the Sri Lanka Ports Authority, does not have the facilities for large ships to dock, the SLPA will be left with nothing to do after the ECT is given away. A cement cargo ship sailing under the Liberian flag had met with an accident near the Little Basses Reef in the southeastern seas. Eurosun ran aground about 13 miles off Sri Lanka's coast near the Little Basses lighthouse in an area referred to as Middle Basses on the reefs. As of now, Navy divers from the Sri Lanka naval ship Ratnadeepa have reached the Eurosun and are assessing the damage. In other news, the Indian government has approved the underwater research project to ascertain the origins of Ram Setu, a 48-kilometer long chain of shores between India and Sri Lanka. The study will focus on the process behind Ram Setu's formation and also whether there are any submerged habitations around the structure. The Ceylon Petroleum Corporation has saved $300 million in foreign exchange in 2020, CPC Chairman Sumit Vijayasinghe told the Committee on Public Enterprises recently. The chairman of CPC came up with this information at a COPE meeting which met in Parliament to discuss the special audit report on the storage and distribution of petroleum. He further said the government was able to take advantage of this due to the fall in the price of a barrel of crude oil last year and several other reasons. Sri Lanka is planning to canvass the support of like-minded countries to present its case at the next session of the United Nations Human Rights Council. The country is listed to come under scrutiny during its 46th session scheduled between February 22nd and March 19. The Foreign Secretary states that the government has appointed a core group to work on measures to face the UNHCR this time. On Monday, the Colombo Stock Exchange continued to break records with the all-share price index increasing by 729 points to close at 8,463 points, while the S&P SL20 index increased by 409 points to close at 3,312 points. Local retail investor dominance was clear, with LOLC Holdings being the highest contributor to the week's turnover value. And in sports, the Indian Premier League's Rajasthan Royals have appointed former Sri Lankan captain Kumar Sangakkara as Director of Cricket for the 14th season of the world's richest cricket league. That's all we have for you this week. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching and stay safe.